Los Angeles, 1973. The Continental Hyatt House on Sunset Boulevard, known to everyone in the music industry as the Riot House, stood gleaming under the California sun like a temple to excess and fame. And on the ninth floor, in Suite 917, David Bowie was preparing for his second night at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium, where 18,000 people would scream for Ziggy Stardust, completely unaware that the man behind the makeup was slowly forgetting where David Jones ended and the alien rock god began. But this story isn't about that concert. This story is about what happened 6 hours before Bowie stepped on that stage, when a 15-year-old girl named Sarah Mitchell did something so reckless, so impossibly bold, that it would reshape her entire understanding of art, identity, and the strange compassion that sometimes flows between strangers. What occurred in that hotel room remained sealed in silence for 40 years, locked behind a promise that Sarah gave to a man she barely knew but would never forget. When she finally spoke in 2013, her revelation didn't just shock the music world. It forced everyone to reconsider what they thought they knew about the Ziggy Stardust era, about fame, and about the terrible loneliness that lives inside the brightest stars. Before we continue, if you appreciate deep dives into untold stories from rock history, please subscribe to this channel. There are so many secrets still waiting to be discovered. Sarah Mitchell wasn't supposed to be in Los Angeles that summer. She was supposed to be at her grandmother's house in San Diego, spending July learning to bake bread and reading books on the porch, far away from the chaos of her parents' crumbling marriage back in Chicago. But Sarah had other plans. She'd been obsessed with David Bowie since she'd first seen him on television 6 months earlier. That shocking appearance on the Midnight Special, where he wore a striped bodysuit and sang Starman with an otherworldly grace that seemed to mock every rule about what men were supposed to be. For Sarah, who'd always felt like an outsider in her own skin, Bowie represented something revolutionary. He was proof that you didn't have to be what everyone expected, that transformation was possible, that strangeness could be beautiful. She'd stolen $200 from her mother's dresser drawer and bought a bus ticket to Los Angeles with a story about a summer art program that didn't exist. By the time Sarah stepped off the Greyhound at the downtown terminal, she had $73 left, a backpack with 3 days of clothes, and absolutely no plan beyond somehow, impossibly, meeting David Bowie. It was the kind of teenage desperation that adults forget they ever felt. That burning certainty that if you could just reach the person who understood you, everything in your broken world might finally make sense. The first 2 nights in Los Angeles, she'd befriended a group of teenage runaways in Hollywood who let her crash in their squat. They were Bowie fans too, all of them wearing thrift store glam, their faces painted with lightning bolts and stars. One of them, a 17-year-old boy named Marcus, told Sarah the secret that changed everything. Bowie was staying at the Continental Hyatt House, and Marcus knew which room because his older sister worked in housekeeping. Suite 917, 9th floor. That was all Sarah needed to hear. The next afternoon, Sarah walked into the Continental Hyatt House lobby, wearing the most respectable clothes she had. A blue dress that was 2 years old and too small. Her hair brushed straight, trying to look like someone who belonged. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and gold, filled with people who moved with the casual arrogance of those who'd never been told no. Sarah walked straight to the elevator with her heart hammering so hard she thought security would surely hear it. But nobody stopped her. She pressed the button for the 9th floor and watched the doors close, sealing her into that small rising box with her own reflection, a pale, nervous girl who looked too young and too scared to be attempting anything remotely dangerous. But what she didn't know was that someone had been watching her from the moment she entered the lobby. Someone who would make her plan far more complicated than she'd ever imagined. The ninth-floor corridor stretched out in both directions, thick carpet muffling every sound. Suite 915 was at the far end. Sarah's hands were shaking as she walked, her mind racing through everything that could go wrong. Security could grab her. Bowie might not even be there. He might answer and be cruel, might dismiss her with the cold efficiency of someone who'd learned to protect himself from the endless demands of strangers. She stood outside Suite 917 for almost 5 minutes, her hand raised to knock, then lowered, then raised again. From inside, she could hear music playing, something experimental and strange, all synthesizers and distant drums. Sarah knocked. 3 quick raps that sounded too loud in the hushed corridor. The music inside stopped. Footsteps approached. The door opened 6 inches, held by a security chain, and through the gap, Sarah saw a man's face, but not Bowie's face. This man was older, maybe 40, with thinning hair and suspicious eyes. "Yeah," he said, his accent American, his tone making it clear that whatever Sarah was selling, he wasn't buying. "I need to see David," Sarah said, her voice coming out smaller than she'd intended. "Please. I came from Chicago. I just need 5 minutes." The man studied her for a long moment. "How'd you get up here? Security's supposed to stop fans." "I walked. Nobody stopped me. Please, I'm not crazy. I just need to talk to him. 5 minutes." The man sighed. "Look, kid. You seem nice, but David sees hundreds of fans. He can't meet them all. Now go home before we have to call someone to remove you." He started to close the door. Sarah felt panic, rising in her chest. "Tell him it's about masks," she blurted out. "Tell him I understand about the masks, and I know why he needs them." The door stopped closing. The man's expression changed, and in that moment, everything shifted. "Wait here," the man said, and he shut the door completely. Sarah heard muffled conversation from inside the suite, 2 male voices, though she couldn't make out the words. 30 seconds passed, a minute. Then the chain rattled and the door opened wide, and the man was stepping aside, gesturing for her to enter. 5 minutes, he said quietly. "That's all he's giving you. Don't waste it." Sarah walked into Suite 917, and the first thing that struck her wasn't the luxury but the darkness. Every curtain was drawn tight, blocking out the California sunshine, leaving the room lit only by a few lamps that cast everything in amber shadow. The air smelled like cigarette smoke, and something sweet she couldn't identify. Clothes were scattered everywhere, glittering stage outfits mixed with ordinary jeans and t-shirts, the costume and the person tangled together with no clear boundary between them. And sitting on the couch, wearing black pants and a simple white shirt, no makeup, his famous orange hair looking darker in the dim light, was David Bowie. He looked smaller than he did on stage, more human, almost fragile. His mismatched eyes watched Sarah with an expression she couldn't read, curious maybe, or wary, or just very tired. He held a cigarette in one hand, smoke curling up toward the ceiling, and for several seconds neither of them spoke. "So," Bowie said finally, his accent crisp in English, his voice softer than she'd expected. "You understand about masks. That's what you told Tony." He gestured toward the man who'd answered the door. "I'm listening." Sarah's carefully rehearsed speech evaporated. Standing here in front of him, she realized how absurd her plan had been. But she'd come this far, and he was actually listening. so she told him the truth. "Everyone thinks Ziggy Stardust is just a character you play," Sarah said, her voice steadier now. "But I think it's more than that. I think you created him because you needed somewhere to hide, someone to be when being yourself got too hard. And now everyone loves Ziggy so much that you're trapped inside him, and nobody sees David anymore. And you're scared that maybe David isn't even there anymore to be seen. I know because I do the same thing. I pretend all the time. I pretend to be the daughter my parents want, the student my teachers expect. And I'm so tired of it. And when I watch you on stage, I feel like you're tired too." The silence that followed felt enormous. Tony shifted uncomfortably by the window. Bowie took a long drag from his cigarette, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. Then, slowly, he smiled, but it wasn't the theatrical smile of Ziggy Stardust. It was something smaller and sadder and infinitely more real. "How old are you?" he asked. 15. "Oh, Christ," he murmured. 15, and you figured out what took me 10 years to understand about myself." He stubbed out his cigarette. "Sit down. You came all this way. We might as well have a proper conversation." What happened next would remain secret for 40 years, but it would change Sarah Mitchell's life in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. Sarah sat on the edge of an armchair across from the couch, still not quite believing this was real. Bowie leaned back, lighting another cigarette. Tony remained by the window, but Bowie waved a hand at him. "It's fine, Tony. Give us some privacy. Wait outside." Tony looked reluctant, but left, closing the door behind him, and suddenly Sarah was alone with David Bowie in a darkened hotel suite. "Tell me about Chicago," Bowie said. "Tell me why you ran away." Sarah hadn't expected questions about her life, but here was David Bowie asking her about Chicago, about her life, like it mattered. So she told him. She told him about her parents' marriage falling apart, the screaming fights, her father's drinking, her mother's bitter silences. She told him about school, where she'd never fit in, where she felt alien in her own skin. She told him about the night she'd seen him on television, how something in his performance had cracked open a door in her mind, how for the first time she'd understood that maybe being different wasn't a flaw to be fixed, but a kind of freedom to be claimed. And she told him about stealing the money, lying to her grandmother, coming to Los Angeles with no real plan except the desperate hope that meeting him might somehow save her. Bowie listened without interrupting, smoking his cigarette, and when Sarah finally ran out of words, he was quiet for a long moment, just thinking. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice low and serious. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and you have to promise me you'll never repeat it. Not to your friends, not to journalists, not even to your parents. Can you promise that?" Sarah nodded. "I promise. I'm not joking. This is important. If you tell anyone, it could ruin things for me. Do you understand?" "Yes, I understand. I won't tell anyone." Bowie studied her face one more time, as if weighing whether she was trustworthy, then seemed to make a decision. "Ziggy Stardust is destroying me," he said flatly. "Everyone thinks I'm in control, that he's just a character I can take off like a costume. But he's not. He's becoming more real than I am. When I'm on stage, I'm not performing Ziggy. I am Ziggy. And when I come off stage, I can't find my way back. I look in mirrors and I don't recognize my own face. Sometimes I'm not sure if I'm David Bowie playing Ziggy Stardust, or if I'm Ziggy Stardust and David Bowie was just a character I invented years ago." He ran a hand through his hair, and Sarah saw that his fingers were shaking slightly. The pressure is enormous. Everyone wants more of Ziggy. More concerts, more albums, more everything. The band is exhausted. I'm exhausted. But I can't stop because stopping feels like dying. And the worst part is that I chose this. I created Ziggy because I wanted to be someone else. Someone braver and stranger than boring David Jones from Brixton. And it worked. Too well. Now I'm trapped inside my own creation, and I don't know how to get out. Sarah felt like she'd been given access to something precious and terrible, a secret that explained everything about the strangeness she'd sensed in Bowie's performances. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked quietly. Bowie smiled again, that sad private smile. "Because you're 15 years old, and you already understand something most people never figure out. And because sometimes it's easier to tell the truth to a stranger. You're not a journalist looking for a story. You're just a girl who ran away because you couldn't breathe in the life you were given. I understand that feeling. I ran away too. I just did it by becoming someone else." He lit another cigarette. "I'm going to kill Ziggy, soon. Maybe in a few months. I'm going to announce on stage that it's his last show, and then I'm going to walk away and figure out who David Bowie is supposed to be without him. It's going to shock everyone, but I have to do it. Because if I don't, Ziggy is going to kill me instead." They talked for almost 2 hours after that, long past the 5 minutes Tony had promised. Bowie asked Sarah what she wanted to do with her life, and she confessed she had no idea. He told her that was perfect, that not knowing was the most honest state a person could occupy. He told her about his early years in London, trying on different styles and personas, desperately searching for something that felt like truth. He told her about the loneliness of fame, how you could be surrounded by thousands of screaming fans and still feel utterly invisible. "The thing nobody tells you about fame," Bowie said, "is that it makes you disappear. Everyone sees you, but nobody knows you. Sometimes I think that's why I created Ziggy, because at least if I was going to disappear, I could control what replaced me. But I was wrong. You can't control these things." Eventually, there was a knock on the door. Tony's voice came through. "David, you need to start getting ready. Sound check is in 90 minutes. Bowie sighed and stood up. "Right, back to work, back to Ziggy." He looked at Sarah. "You need to go home, back to Chicago. Call your parents, tell them you're safe, get on a bus. Running away doesn't solve anything. I know because I've been running my whole life." "I don't want to go back," Sarah said. "There's nothing here for you either," Bowie said gently. "Los Angeles will chew you up. You're 15. Go home, finish school, figure out who you are before you start trying to be someone else." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a room service receipt with something written on it. "This is my manager's address in New York. In 5 years, when you're 20, if you're still thinking about all this, write to me there. Tell me what you figured out. I'd like to know how your story turns out." He handed her the paper, and Sarah took it with shaking hands. 5 years, 20 years old. It seemed impossibly far away. "One more thing," Bowie said as Tony appeared in the doorway. "The secret I told you, about Ziggy destroying me, about planning to kill him. You promised not to tell anyone. Can I trust you?" "Yes," Sarah said. "I won't tell. I promise." "Good. Because secrets are sacred. They're the only things we truly own. Guard this one. Keep it safe. And maybe someday, when enough time has passed, you can tell the story. But not yet. Not for a long time." Tony led Sarah back through the corridor to the elevator, and as the doors closed, She caught one last glimpse of Suite 917, the door already shut, the secret locked inside. Sarah did go home. She called her mother from a payphone, crying, apologizing. She got on a Greyhound bus and rode back to Chicago with the piece of paper tucked in her pocket like a talisman. She watched from afar when Bowie announced at Hammersmith Odeon in July 1973 that Ziggy Stardust was being retired, and she understood what the shocked fans didn't, that this wasn't a publicity stunt, but a desperate act of self-preservation. She kept his secret, just as she'd promised, never telling anyone about that afternoon in Suite 917, even when journalists would have paid good money for the story. When Sarah turned 20 in 1978, she wrote a letter to that address in New York. She told Bowie she'd graduated high school, that she was studying art and psychology in college, that she'd kept his secret and always would. She thanked him for the advice that had probably saved her life. She mailed the letter not expecting a response, but 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived with a single sentence in blue ink. "I'm proud of you. Keep searching. Love, David." Sarah kept that note with the original receipt, precious artifacts from a day that felt more like a dream than a memory. She built a life, became a therapist specializing in identity and adolescent psychology, got married, had children, and through it all, she carried Bowie's secret like a sacred trust. She watched him evolve through the decades, watched him find peace with his wife Iman, watched him step back from the spotlight, and she never broke her promise. Until 2013, that was the year Sarah turned 55, and Bowie released his first album in a decade, The Next Day. Sarah listened and felt something shift inside her. She was no longer the desperate teenager who'd snuck into a hotel room. She was a woman who'd built a meaningful life, who'd helped hundreds of teenagers navigate their own crises. And she realized that maybe after 40 years, the secret had transformed from something that could hurt Bowie into something that could help people understand him. So, Sarah did something she'd never imagined doing. She broke her promise. She reached out to a journalist friend and told the whole story. The hotel room, the conversation, Bowie's confession about Ziggy destroying him, all of it. She had evidence, the receipt with the address, the note from 1978, details that matched everything known about Bowie's state of mind during the Ziggy era. The story was published in a major music magazine, and it went viral, sparking debates across the internet. Some people accused Sarah of betrayal. Others thanked her for revealing a side of Bowie that explained so much about his art. The music world was divided, but Sarah had made peace with her decision. 40 years was long enough. Bowie was 70, secure in his legacy, no longer vulnerable to the pressures that had nearly destroyed him in 1973. The story couldn't hurt him now. It could only illuminate the courage it took to survive fame and transformation. Bowie never publicly commented on Sarah's revelation. He didn't confirm or deny it, didn't reach out to express gratitude or anger. He simply remained silent, letting the music speak for itself. But 2 years later, in January 2016, when Bowie died just days after releasing Black Star, his final album, Sarah understood that his silence had been its own kind of response. He'd spent his entire life transforming, becoming new people, and in the end, he'd transformed one last time, from living artist to eternal legend. And maybe her story was part of that transformation, part of helping the world understand that behind all the glittering personas was a human being who struggled and survived. The story of what happened in Suite 917 isn't really about secrets or broken promises. It's about the strange gift that sometimes passes between strangers. The moment when someone sees you clearly and tells you a truth you desperately need to hear. David Bowie didn't have to let a 15-year-old runaway into his hotel room. He could have had security remove her, could have dismissed her as another obsessed fan. But he didn't. He opened the door. He listened. He shared his own pain, his own desperate struggle to remain human under the crushing weight of fame. And in doing so, he gave Sarah something more valuable than an autograph. He gave her permission to struggle, permission to not know who she was, permission to transform without disappearing. That's the real revelation Sarah shared in 2013, not just gossip about Ziggy Stardust, but the simple truth that behind every icon is a person, and that person is probably just as lost and scared as anyone else. Fame doesn't solve loneliness. Success doesn't answer who you really are. These were the lessons Bowie learned the hard way, and these were the lessons he passed on to a runaway teenager who needed to hear them. Sarah kept the secret for 40 years because promises matter, but she revealed it eventually because secrets, like people, transform over time. What starts as something dangerous can become something healing. The story stopped being about protecting David Bowie and became about honoring him, about showing that his art came from a real place of struggle, that his transformations weren't just theatrical tricks, but desperate attempts to survive. When Sarah thinks about that day now, what she remembers most isn't the glamour or surrealism of meeting a rock star. It's the kindness in Bowie's eyes when he told her to go home, the genuine concern for a troubled kid he'd never met before. It's the way he treated her like she mattered, like her story was as important as his. That kindness, that moment of real connection across the vast gulf of fame and age, that's what saved her. Not his music, though she loved his music. Not Ziggy Stardust, but his humanity, his willingness to admit he was lost too. There are thousands of people who met David Bowie over 5 decades of fame. Most of those encounters were brief, transactional. But some went deeper, touched something real. Sarah's story is one of those rare meetings, and she waited 40 years to share it because she understood that some gifts need time to ripen. Some truths need distance to be told properly. The 15-year-old who snuck into Suite 917 is gone, replaced by a woman who spent her life helping others. The 26-year-old rock star is gone too, replaced by a legend whose final transformation was death itself. But the conversation they had, the truths they shared, those things remain. A reminder that even between a desperate teenager and an overwhelmed celebrity, genuine human connection is possible. And sometimes those brief connections change everything.